Yeah, so I'll go ahead and kick us off. So what I'll say about AI, just to start the conversation, is that right now AI gets talked about like it's a strategy. And I just want to level set like right off the bat, it's not. AI is a tool. AI is a tool that can be used to solve very specific problems, just like applications, dashboards, everything that came before it. It's a piece of technology that can solve problems. And right now, what I'm seeing in industry is that the problem is really in implementation. So it's not access to these models. Anyone can bring up ChatGPT, right? It's one of the easiest things in the world to do. It's not the models themselves even. I know that we hear a lot about like ChatGPT versus Gemini versus Claude. None of that is what I'm seeing as the problem right now. It's the actual execution of the models. So to back up a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about Data-Driven West Virginia, which is the program I run here at the university. At the end of the day, we're a technology consulting center. We have two primary ways that we do that. One, it will be very familiar here, and I won't have to over-explain it, which is really nice. It's very similar to a clinic model that you're all familiar with. So essentially, students work on consulting teams and solve projects for businesses, predominantly here in West Virginia. A lot of small businesses, nonprofits, and we help with technology needs across the spectrum. Everything from implementing a piece of technology to building custom software. Right now, what we're seeing a lot of is companies that are struggling with AI adoption. So that's a lot of what we do these days in Data-Driven West Virginia with these student teams. And the reason that I think that a lot of companies right now are struggling with that is because they're starting with the tool, which is a very bad philosophy for technology implementation. But it's not a new one. This is something we've seen as long as technology's been around. Organizations will buy into this new tool and then ask the question, how do we use this, right? The question should always be the opposite. So what I teach students in my courses and as they work as consultants for me is that you start with friction in a business. That's always your starting point. So you look for where the problem is, and then you solve the problem with the relevant tools, which sometimes is traditional software, sometimes it's AI systems. And so right now what we're seeing is that everyone wants to use AI. They come to us and say, how do we use AI? And what we end up implementing, at least half the time, I would say, is just things that have been best practice for a long time that are either AI adjacent or not AI at all. So automating workflows, right? I think everyone, thinks about AI being the magic bullet for this. There is still a lot of workflow automations that can happen at a much, much higher level with way easier to use software. Think about just creating rules in Microsoft Outlook, right? There are organizations that can benefit much, much more from something that simple than they can from actually adopting like an AI solution. And then getting their data together, right? So that's the other big problem. Organizations want to adopt these sophisticated AI systems with like RAG built into them, but they have nothing to augment the generation with. They have no data to actually pull from, right? So if you don't have a sophisticated data environment for your business, that's a much higher ROI place to start than just dumping in something like ChatGPT to your organization. But AI is often the answer. I'm very bullish on AI. It might sound like I'm not. There are a lot of problems in businesses that can be solved and are being solved actively with AI. But you should never start with that. I'll talk about a few problems that we've solved. So the other arm of what we do at Data Driven is we do faculty consulting. So I'm a consultant. I consult a lot for the state government and larger nonprofits, normally in the allocation of big pools of money to solve societal problems. So one problem that we worked on as a faculty research problem was the allocation of broadband money. So if you follow the news, it's almost become old hat at this point, but a couple years ago, it dominated the news cycle that the state of West Virginia was receiving about $1 billion in federal funding to make sure that every single West Virginian has access to high-speed internet. That's not the first time that large pools of government funding have been tried to spend to solve that problem. And so what we were hired to do by the state office is do a needs assessment to figure out where those other efforts failed and how we can do better this time to make sure that the money actually gets spent correctly. And we used a lot of machine learning to do it. So we use machine learning to look at things like eligibility, right? Who in the state is eligible versus who isn't. Developing funding allocation models. So we took Think of like every indicator that you could possibly create from data that's publicly available, from the FCC, from census. We put all that together and used machine learning to sort through what actually matters, what's actually a good indicator of whether or not someone has broadband and whether or not someone has the ability to use that broadband. And then we did some really advanced geospatial analysis where we did things like cost estimations. Ultimately, there were cost estimations generated by hand by civil engineers, but we needed answers faster to that as we were developing the proposals, so we used machine learning to develop those cost estimates. And what is really important in that analysis is that this wasn't just something we did one time, right? We built all these systems live so that we continuously have updated data as these efforts move forward. So that's really core to what we do. Another one that's really relevant right now, we've just started on this work. The state of West Virginia got about $1 billion of opioid settlement funds that went to a foundation called the West Virginia First Foundation, and we're doing the needs assessment to figure out how to spend that money. Again, we're using AI, but we're using it as a tool to solve specific problems, right? Sorting through the massive amounts of data that you could look at this problem and distilling it down to a few key performance indicators that we can give to decision makers and boots on the ground to figure out the best way to allocate these funds. We've worked on big initiatives like that. We've helped a lot of small businesses through our clinic model. And the thing that was really important to us as we did all this is we asked, how do we scale this, right? Right now, people have to come to WVU if they want this expertise on AI. And what we saw is that there was a real workforce gap in AI skills. So if you look at any major indicator of like the most in-demand workforce skills, you'll see that AI competency is creeping up to the top positions. And so we took a look at AI programs from across the country and figured out why this gap existed. And what we saw is that they were really misaligned with the market. So what companies are looking for is people that can take AI systems and apply them immediately into a business to solve problems. What we're generating in academia right now across the nation is students that high level can understand AI and like the theoretical underpinnings of that, which is a useful skill, but it's not necessarily the skill set that workforce is looking for. So at the university, we just built a new applied AI and data analytics degree, and we decided to take what we knew worked really well from the consulting work we've done, the work we've done with Data Driven West Virginia, and turn that into a workforce development degree that produces students that are ready to tackle these challenges in businesses. So some things we did differently with this degree, some things I'm really proud of about it. The first thing is we built in dual competencies. So students who get this degree program have to get a major or a minor from somewhere else at the university. Again, that's doubling down on our commitment that AI is not a strategy, it's not a thing, it's a tool, right? And so if you don't have an application domain that you can apply that tool to, then you've got a really useful toolbox and absolutely no skill set to use it. So we've required that dual competency. And then something else is that we have gone radically experiential in this program. So I'm a big proponent of experiential learning. I've taught capstone courses in multiple programs at the university. And capstones are great. They're a fantastic experience. But what we saw with students is they got a capstone experience at the end of their course of study. The idea being that you need to go through the entire course of study before you have remotely the knowledge required to solve a real-world problem. I don't believe that because I've had freshmen come to me from radically different majors across the university and volunteer as consultants. They take a Coursera course and within 2 weeks, they're ready to start making changes that positively impact an organization. And the other part is placement. So students get this real world experience at the end of their degree, but placement happens all the way back in November of that senior year. Or moving even further back than that, placement happens all the way back when they're looking at internships their junior year. So if students get an internship junior year, they're much, much more likely to get a full-time offer. So we took that concept of a capstone and what we've developed at Data Driven West Virginia and created a really unique hybrid course. It's a course I teach called AI Consulting. And so we teach students how to be AI consultants in the classroom, and then they have an actual client project that they do as part of that course. So it's a blend of everything that we've done right throughout all our programs. What I think is really interesting about that course is you would think in an AI consulting course, I'd be standing behind the lectern and lecturing about topics like agents and how to build agentic workflows and all that sort of stuff. But those are the things that we challenge students to figure out on their own through their project. What I teach behind the podium is how students should be consultants. How do you manage a client meeting? What do you do if a client's not listening to you or taking your suggestions? How do you do requirements gathering? How do you do solution engineering? And so we flipped the educational model. Typically, you think of these experiential learning projects as being the place where students develop soft skills, and then you teach the technical skills in the classroom. We're doing the exact opposite, where we're teaching soft skills in the classroom and then letting the students develop technical skills on their own. Because if the pace technology is moving, they have to be able to do that self-learning if they're going to succeed in this environment. And we've had a tremendous success with this course. We've drawn a lot of industry attention. I've got a wait list of companies that want to do these projects with us in the AI consulting course. But more than that, big consulting firms are coming to recruit directly out of this course. So I've had 4 students go through this course that have Deloitte offers right now. BCG, Boston Consulting Group, one of the MBB firms. I've been around for a long time. I'm a 4-time mountaineer. I have 4 degrees from this place. I don't ever remember an MBB firm being on campus recruiting. I might be wrong about that. Someone that's been around longer might remember. But they're going to be on campus Monday, and they visited 2 classrooms at the university before that, and this AI consulting course was one of them. So we're very passionate about what we're building over in the business college. We think that we are producing students that are workforce ready, that are able to solve these problems, and we know that they are because they've done it. They've done it in class, they've done it as volunteers, and we're also able to pay students to do this type of work as well. To sum up really quickly, AI is a tool, right? AI is a tool that can be applied to solve problems, but it's not the only tool. Existing tools still exist, and we always need to start with that problem. If you don't start with the problem, you're never going to have a successful AI implementation.
Okay, well, first, let me say thank you for inviting me, including me on the panel. It's a pleasure. I get to share a little bit about the perspective of a company who is building with AI, making AI products here in West Virginia. So it's an honor to be able to do that here where I started out and where our company started out with an idea in a classroom here. So for us, we began with an idea, a simple idea about helping people make more persuasive arguments as attorneys, as litigators. And in the years since, we've gone to classrooms and courtrooms across the country, helping people with a variety of use cases, everything from answering cold calls and doing Socratic method questioning in the classroom specific to the cases that they read for their courses, to preparing arguments all the way at the United States Supreme Court. So that journey for us started here, and we're proud to be a West Virginia company through and through and through. About what we do, the product Cicero. So the company is Rhetoric, the product is Cicero. It's kind of the opposite of ancient Rome, where the author was Cicero and the book was Rhetoric. So we tried to make it thoroughly confusing. But the product Cicero allows you to speak aloud to Cicero. It can be on your phone, it can be on your laptop, it can be on your iPad, it can be pretty much anywhere. You speak aloud, and it's all context specific. So if you're preparing an oral argument, for example, you would give it your brief. It'll question you about your brief. You answer questions aloud like you would to a hot bench. In court, you can deliver closing statements. You can deliver opening statements. It'll judge you based on the context that you give it and provide you coaching and direction on how to do better. This is being implemented all across the country, like I said. So on the West Coast, the #1 ranked law school in the country, Stanford, we just signed a 2-year agreement as of 2 weeks ago. They'll be using Cicero, all students, all faculty, all staff. In the middle of the country, Michigan, a top 10 program, WashU, a top 14. Same story. East Coast looks very similar. We're happy now to be expanding into paralegal education as well. And then on the courtroom side, we've been used from the Southern District of New York to the Bay, and even all the way at the United States Supreme Court as of last year. One other cool aside about that we're proud of for Rhetoric is that the kernel of an idea for Cicero is an idea I had reading Chemerinsky's Constitutional Law, which is a page turner if you've not had the opportunity. But that book is published by Aspen Publishing, and Aspen is one of the premier legal publishers, and they're now our exclusive partner as of January of this year. So they're selling our Cicero product to law schools all across the country, as well as undergraduate institutions and law firms. So that's something we're very proud of. In terms of our story, I'll get in a moment to what I think makes West Virginia a special place to build with AI. But for us, our story started here. We've been proud to stay here. When so many people choose to leave, we've been proud to build the product here. And it doesn't get much more West Virginia than this. There was one point where I was running the company out of one of my parents' barns in Ona, West Virginia. And so there's some famous stories of startups that started in the founder's parents' garage, but not as many as about starting in the founder's parents' barn. But we raised about our first $1 million in capital there. We've raised a few million since, and that's been our story. So what's valuable about building an AI startup in West Virginia? For us, our access to capital, we've chosen to take all of our money exclusively from West Virginians or West Virginians who got lost and they're in Washington, D.C. right now or California or some other place, but they wish they were here. So we've raised over $3 million to date. That doesn't sound like a lot in comparison to some of the California Silicon Valley companies, perhaps, but as far as we know, we've been told that's the most that an AI startup in West Virginia has raised, and we've taken it exclusively from West Virginians. The value of that is the commitment of fellow West Virginians and how excited they are to contribute to somebody who's building here. We don't have the network effect in West Virginia that you might have in a city like New York, where you know a person and they know a person and that person happens to know Jamie Dimon somehow. That'd be pretty useful. That doesn't exist here in quite the same way, but every connection you have, in my opinion, is much more committed to seeing you succeed. And so we've seen a lot of people bend over backwards to help us have some success, and we've been really fortunate to have so many people committed to us in that way. In terms of other things that are beneficial, I've had the opportunity to work with a few different PR firms, public relation firms, and they all have lots of advice for you. But I'll tell you the common thread among all the ones that I've interacted with, they all say to lean into the fact that you're a West Virginia company. It has an authenticity and a built-in trust that doesn't exist for a lot of the Silicon Valley type AI companies. We see people have sort of an inherent trust for what we're doing and what we're building. We don't have a lot of the negative stigma that other people have towards AI products and companies, and that's been a benefit to us. As an example, we were privileged to be invited to the American Bar Association's tech show as a finalist for their Startup of the Year award. There were 15 finalist companies, and on a billboard there in the room where we did our Shark Tank style pitch, they had the companies listed with their headquarters cities. And it was all the usual suspects of New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and Ona, West Virginia. And it really stood out, and I think it probably started more conversations that were useful for us than anything else. So it truly is something that stands out in a positive way. My intuition at the beginning would have been that people will see this as a negative. But in reality, people find it to be a positive. It's something interesting, it's something different, and it shows an authenticity that a lot of other companies seem to lack. So that's been part of our journey. Now, there's often this quote that said that talent is distributed evenly, but opportunities are not. I think the same is probably true of ideas. Ideas are distributed pretty evenly, but the opportunities are not. The old paradigm would have been if you had a big idea and you're in a place like Ona, West Virginia, so you would chase the big capital to the big cities, and then the big idea is not in West Virginia anymore. But we've worked really hard to flip that paradigm on its head and try to bring the capital to the ideas here in West Virginia. AI makes that possible. COVID, unfortunately, made that possible. People became very accustomed to doing business over Zoom. I'll tell you, for us, when we meet with deans and firms and executives, we do it all by Zoom. So it's very familiar and comfortable now. But that ability to bring capital home or capital from venture capital funds that do happen to be in West Virginia, most of that leaks out of the state. We've been very happy that we've been able to be part of reversing that trend, keeping money here to fund exciting products like ours. And there are other good AI startups in West Virginia, including some coming through like Vantage Ventures and these organizations that we have here on campus. Then, as usual, I think this is largely about West Virginia and West Virginians making its own luck. We're bringing opportunities here and kind of leveling the playing field. So Vantage Ventures is a great example of that. The accelerators at Marshall University. It's really been a whole of state effort, as far as I can tell, folks stepping up, creating resources, creating opportunities, creating access to networks that otherwise you wouldn't be able to tap into from West Virginia. And so that's been great to see. That's part of what I think has made working from West Virginia as an AI startup something that's actually advantageous rather than a drawback. So that's been my experience, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Well, thanks so much. And I just want to note with pride that Luke was in the very first class of AI and the law I ever taught at this law school. I can take zero credit for all of his success because Rhetoric had already been founded at that point, and he really already had a very clear vision. But I am nonetheless very proud to claim him among my AI and the law alums. So when I try to think about what to share today in the time that we have, we captioned this session Innovation and Opportunity. And I get really excited when I think about all of the ways in which West Virginia is already leading in the AI space and all of the ways in which we can continue to lead. So in case you aren't aware of how we're already leading, let me tell you a couple of things. West Virginia's lawyers had some of the first guidance in the country on how to use AI ethically in the practice of law. We had a legal ethics opinion before the ABA did. The ABA cites to our opinion in their guidance because we got it out first. We were one of the first states to do that. We remain one of the only states that has an ethics opinion specific to judicial use of AI products and the way that the canons apply to that. Professor Ashley has been teaching in this space since 1985-ish, and I cannot claim to have been doing that. But I do think it's noteworthy that we have had more than one AI class, at least one since 2020, and we now, after this fall, will have almost 4 focused classes on AI. But of course, classes focused specifically on AI are not the only way that the law school is contributing to the AI discussion and thinking about the realities of preparing lawyers for an AI world. In many doctrinal classes, my colleagues do an excellent job of talking about the impact of AI. I'm thinking about people like Elaine Wilson, who is using Gen AI models in her tax classes and her transactional drafting classes and helping students think through that. I'm thinking about my colleagues in our library who are teaching students how to use Gen AI research models and how to use them well. I'm thinking about the many writing faculty who are in the building who are being thoughtful about what Gen AI models can contribute to writing and where their introduction can be too early. And of course, in our clinic space as well. I give a general AI orientation to the clinic students in certain clinics every year because they are, of course, the front lines of actual lawyering, and it's really important that we're thoughtful about that. So there are a lot of ways that the College of Law is leading on this. Before I go into the details of how I think we are doing a very balanced and effective approach, I also just want to note that our ability to be part of the larger WVU community, to work with people like Professor Meadows and with his colleagues over in the Chambers College who have had great relationships with and have a couple of ongoing projects with, that actually makes us a lot better at what we're doing. So I really think that WVU is uniquely positioned to thrive and to be a leader in AI. We are an R1 research institution with a med school and a law school and a land-grant mission. There are not very many of us around, and it makes us a bit of a unicorn in this space. And each of those things is really important because AI is an inherently interdisciplinary field. Okay, so when I have, let's take my AI in the law class this semester, for example, and several of you who are in that class are here right now. We've had a student who is a computer science PhD taking the class some days alongside us, right? He was able, got a little complicated for him to actually audit it. So we just invited him to come to certain classes and share his knowledge. So having a computer science PhD student as you're learning certain technical things is incredibly valuable. We've also had guest lectures from alums, including Luke and other folks. We had a WVU alum who's currently doing First Amendment defamation law with respect to AI-generated defamation cases in DC. We've had professors in cybersecurity come and talk to the class. So we've done hands-on skills labs, and we're doing more of those where you can play with certain tools that are available in sort of a sandbox, safe space. So it's an inherently interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary endeavor. And so I think that schools that have technical sophistication but not law schools are at a bit of a disadvantage. Sometimes amazing schools that have really incredible technical programs, Carnegie Mellon, other places will call us. And I know call our colleagues in the other Pittsburgh law schools because they don't have a law school, or maybe they don't have a med school, or they're not an R1, or they don't have our land grant mission. And so we are really in a great space, and I always am really grateful for that. So what's the approach? How do you think through preparing the next generation of lawyers to thrive in a space where AI is absolutely part of their work? Some surveys that have been released recently suggest that 90% of lawyers in practice today use Gen AI models in their work. And a recent study that came out of Sedona suggested that of the federal judges who responded to the survey, 60% of them have used Gen AI in their work. So I think this idea that there's any kind of debate about whether to prepare students is just, I think that horse has left the barn. The question is how to prepare students, because it is the reality, whatever our feelings on that, it is the reality of what they are graduating into. And I really appreciated, as I know many of you did, Professor Fairfield's comments today, because my students have had to listen to me talk about things like the compression of creativity and how dangerous that can be, and how careful you have to be, especially in appellate law, about which point you introduce Gen AI models into your writing, because we do not want to lose the human essential parts of lawyering, the creativity. By definition, a model that has only been trained on what has existed in the past doesn't get to tell us how law could develop or should develop, because that is a human endeavor. And so over-reliance on tools could be dangerous in that sense. And we have to be thoughtful about making sure that the parts of our brain that perform cognitive resilience and can have a sustained attention span, we have to actively work to protect those things. And so some of the collaboration that I have done with colleagues here at the university has included colleagues in our neuroscience and psychology departments. How do we help students use these tools without hijacking their dopamine reward system and becoming addicted to whatever type of use they are using? Or how do we help them thrash about in the difficult problem of a first draft, right? I'm really attuned to the research that suggests writing is a form of thinking. And if writing is a form of thinking and writing is a form of organizing, then skipping a first draft can be very detrimental, not only to the final outcome, but also to your development as a writer. So thinking through where in the process do we introduce Gen AI tools? How do we do it in a way that is thoughtful and responsible? Because there's the use that is not great and that is going to hijack your creativity. And then there's the use that a student used. I don't think he's in the class right now, so I won't call him out. Earlier this week, a student said in my appellate advocacy class, "Hey, Professor Cyphert, can I upload my brief into ChatGPT and see how it would do on making a table of authorities for me?" And after talking through the data privacy questions there and making sure he knew that he was probably giving his intellectual property to a third party, I said, "Sure, have fun." And he did it. And it was a pretty crappy table of authorities, right? To the shock of no one, the free ChatGPT tool didn't really understand id and how to kind of reflect it in a table of authorities. But it did a spot-on job of alphabetizing the many cases in the brief. And he said for that alone, it would be worth it to just have been able to alphabetize. Can he alphabetize? Absolutely. Is that the best and highest use of his lawyering skills? Absolutely not. If he were at a law firm he would probably have a paralegal doing that, and that paralegal would bill out at a much smaller rate. That's why we train lawyers to do certain tasks. One of the hardest things I had to learn as an associate was not to be so independent, that there were times I had to let other people do the work because no one wanted to pay my billing rate for things that someone else could do. So we have a duty, we have an obligation to our clients to charge reasonable fees, and we have an obligation to train students who know how to charge reasonable fees, and this can be a really great opportunity to talk about what that looks like. It's not going to be a reasonable thing if you have to spend time fixing hallucinations, but it really might be great if you're going to alphabetize a table of authorities from a lengthy brief. That could be a really good way of thinking about it. So we have to think through balancing teaching students the skills of AI, but also protecting their development as young lawyers and as young writers. I did a series of interviews. I actually had to get IRB approval for this. It was a whole process, but I did a series of interviews with judges, both federal and state, last year, and developed that about their use of Gen AI, and that was recently released with the National Center for State Courts as a white paper. And one of the things I learned from those interviews is that not a single judge I spoke to was concerned about their use of Gen AI. And fair point, because these are the early adopters who are really attuned to the risks and benefits. These folks were talking about hallucinations, about regurgitation, about cybersecurity issues. They understand, they are very well versed. But they are deeply concerned about the impact on young lawyers and on law students. They are very worried that they are able to use, the judges are able to use the tools well because they are experts. And how did they become experts? They were trained. They were brought up through a system that forced them to do certain amounts of grunt work that was annoying but taught them skills that are good skills to have. And they're really concerned that there will be a whole generation of lawyers who just aren't given those same training and development opportunities. And that's something that they are really thoughtful about keeping for their clerks and keeping for other people. So I know we have a lot of folks within the legal community who are partners at law firms and especially hiring partners at law firms. I occasionally hear from folks who say to me, we're going to stop hiring for a while until we see how all of this plays out. And I just cannot stress what a short-sighted, bad idea I think that is. I think you have to continue to invest in the next generation of lawyers. You do not want to get to a place where you have a kind of cliff that falls off at your law firm, where you have nobody with skills under a certain age and where you have relied too much on things that might change in the future. So I understand. I'm very clear-eyed, and I appreciated both Professor Lopasso and Professor Frazier talking about the labor impacts. I'm not suggesting there won't be any. I am saying it would be a huge mistake to stop hiring at this point. So I think another thing that that is really important to me, one of the classes that I get to teach is called Regulating AI. And so occasionally journalists or others will ask me, well, how should we regulate AI? And I guess that's a reasonable question if you purport to teach a class entitled Regulating AI. But those of you in the classroom who have taken that class know my answer is, I don't know. I genuinely don't. But I know these are the things we should keep in mind as we do it, right? So if you are thinking about regulating AI, and you're thinking about how do we maximize AI's benefit and minimize its harm, it requires every single person be involved in that decision and be at the table. And the problem with AI, and I think sometimes this is intentionally done by technology companies, is there's this level of alphabet soup and this level of you don't understand this stuff, and so you don't get to weigh in. And that's wrong. A lot of what I'm attempting to do in my classes and in the CLE presentations that I give is help an intelligent layperson understand the technology at a level that allows them to make informed choices. Can I train you to understand transformer architecture? Absolutely not, because I don't. My math stopped long before that, okay? Can I help you understand what a probabilistic model is and why a hallucination is an inherent feature of a probabilistic model? Absolutely. Absolutely, I can help you understand that. And then you're able to think through, do I want to use this? What guardrails do I need in place? How am I going to think about this? So I think a big part of what we're doing at the law school is we are making sure that we are graduating people who can be critical consumers. Do I occasionally have students who are like, I don't want to use this. I'm really disturbed by this technology. Yes. Absolutely. I have students who say, I'm really concerned about the environmental impact. I'm really concerned that it was intellectual theft when they took someone else's material and used it to train. And I say, have I got some good opinions for you to read on the fair use defense and copyright, right? Stay tuned, that battle's not over. But for the most part, the students I have are saying things like, I want to make sure that the use I have is professional and ethical, and I want to make sure that in my law firm or in my community, we are doing this well and that we are using it in a way that promotes the common good. And I feel really confident that we are doing that here at the law school, that we are training people who are able to have those conversations and able to impact the dialogue. And so the one thing I would say, especially to the students in the room, do not sit this one out. Okay, you may not be interested in AI. AI policy is very interested in you, and you shouldn't sit this one out. You should absolutely educate yourselves, and you should make sure that you know enough to make informed decisions, to speak up, to think about the privacy implications, to think about misinformation and disinformation, to think about the First Amendment impacts of all of this and how much this stress tests as portions of the Constitution. Those are all really important topics that you will need to think about. And I think with that, we can stop and take questions.
All right, do we have any takers? Professor Cyphert, Professor Meadows, Luke, thank you all so much. My question is actually for Mr. Yingling. I know people in law school who have side hustles, but it sort of seems like you kind of came across the ultimate side hustle, becoming a CEO and everything. So how did Professor Cyphert's class impact your work at Rhetoric?
I appreciate that leading question. Not did, but how did. Thank you so much for that, George.
First, incredible pronunciation of Yingling. You did a spot-on job. It's like the beer, but I don't get any beer royalties, so we had to do Rhetoric instead. In terms of side hustles, I don't know. The title CEO is easy to have when you give it to yourself, but the harder thing is getting people to follow with you, to be part of that journey, to put the capital in. It takes a lot for people to have faith in somebody who's young in school and to have the patience. And that's when when I talk about raising capital in West Virginia and what's unique about that. Our investors have been exceptionally patient. When we started, I was still in school with a couple years to go. I had 2 kids at the time, I have 3 now, proud to say. And so it took a lot of patience and faith for them to start putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars on a long-term vision. A lot of the capital that you would get from Silicon Valley is fast capital. They're going to push you hard. They're going to make you get the product to market really quickly. And like Professor Meadows said, it's really about understanding the friction points and the true problems. It takes a lot of time to test that out and understand the problems you're solving and what problems truly need solved, what problems are appropriate to solve with AI. So that took a great deal of time. So I've almost lost touch with the actual question you asked, but the AI in law class, now I remember. We're coming full circle. We're going to land the airplane, don't worry. That class actually was helpful. It brought me a lot of concrete examples about uses and misuses of AI. Gave me a lot of opportunities. I used a lot of materials from that course, by the way, to get myself in on panels like this one at other schools so I could network. And a lot of our capital and early clients came from that. But I would say the most important thing for a startup starting out, whether it's in school or otherwise, is to find those early adopters, those folks who have faith and patience to do the journey with you. For us, that has largely been West Virginians. Our first investor was a lawyer turned business person. He's been with us the entire time, all these years. And as one of the 3 members of our board, kind of like one of those lifers who starts as an investor and becomes a really close friend. So if I were giving advice to anybody who wants to turn a side hustle into a real business, it would be that. Look for those people who can be with you for the long run.
Right, thank you. Anyone else?
My question is also for Mr. Yingling. So you mentioned that you went through a process of assessing what problems need to be solved. I guess my question would be, one, what were those problems? And two, do you foresee any other problems that you all have goals of solving in the future?
Absolutely. So my initial idea for the company was wrong, and we proved it wrong with a lot of money. Took some time, but that's the way it goes for most software companies. We started as a traditional algorithmic software kind of company. ChatGPT 2.5 or whatever it was, maybe 3, kind of burst into people's awareness. Very quickly, we moved in the AI direction because we had proprietary algorithmic stuff. And all of our ideas initially were about how to be more persuasive for the particular judge or judges, if it's a panel, that you're dealing with in your case. That was the core idea. That's a real problem. How do you write more persuasively or argue more persuasively for those judges? That idea had a lot of cachet. It won us awards, but the product was not selling. What we realized that the real problems were really about training and experiential learning. That was a problem that affected law schools and firms alike, so it allowed us to sell in both directions. So it took a lot of failure, a lot of effort, and a lot of pivoting to figure that out. And part of it was also just the realities of business. The procurement cycle at the major firms we were talking to, like top 50 firms, the procurement cycle for them can be 18 to 24 months. And startups raise capital on a window of 18 to 24 months. So it's a pretty good recipe to die. So we recognized that halfway into burning several $1 million, and we pivoted hard towards schools. And part of that effort to test that out and prove that it was a good market was our Moot Court Madness that you were nice enough to plug earlier. It's a cool competition. It's all judged by the product. The winner gets $5,000. But that was our entry to the law school market only last year. And that was to prove that there was a real product market fit in that space. Once we did that, we raised more capital. We went faster and harder in that direction. We got an excellent partner in Ashman Publishing. They make all of the red and black case books that you've paid for. We're bringing some of those dollars back to West Virginia, by the way. But that's been part of the journey, and that's part of how we learned. Now, in terms of other problems, there's a really helpful tool called the Ansoff Matrix that people use to decide what kind of problems do we want to go solve next as a company, what's riskier to do, what's less risky to do. I think one of the important things is not to think about what's the most adjacent thing to law for us to go work on next. That might be like accounting. But let's go look at what are the most adjacent problems to go solve next. Okay, so that would have a couple characteristics for us. It needs to involve verbal communication, because that's what the product's all about. It needs to be outcome determinative, meaning if you're bad at making an oral argument, and Cicero identifies that, a bad oral argument could determine the outcome of your case. So it's outcome determinative, and it involves domain-specific logic. So we need a human in the loop with real human expertise on this topic so we can ensure the model is going to deliver on the value proposition. We need that recipe. Where else does that exist outside of law? Nursing is a great example. Verbal communication happens all the time, ER, OR, anytime you're involved with the patient, informing them about their medications. The examples are endless. It's outcome determinative, because if you do a bad job, it's bad news for the patient. And it requires domain-specific knowledge. So we had the foresight to hire a doctorate of nursing practice about 1.5 years ago. He's become integrated in the team. He's product manager. Now he's the product lead on Cicero Health. We launched Cicero Health a month ago. We went out to do customer discovery with just 3 schools. And in the past 4 weeks, we've got $100,000 in revenue and procurement. We weren't trying to sell the product. We were just demonstrating, and we were just kind of asking for feedback. So that's kind of been our journey to that point. We've learned a lot about how to identify real problems and solve them. And so the cycle this time through is much faster to revenue for us because of all those learnings from the past.
And I just want to, go ahead, Chris.
I
You
was
have a
just saying
follow-up?
thank you.
Okay, great. I wanted to speak for a moment to Rhetoric's tool, to Cicero, and some of the things that I like about it. There's a lot of snake oil in legal tech. There's a lot of snake oil in AI in general, right? What I really like about their tool, and I have no financial relationship here, I promise this is not a paid, right? I actually really like that it is a tool that lets students practice cold calls. As a faculty member, that's a really cool use case for me because I teach 1Ls in the fall, right? They are so nervous. And I teach CivPro, which for everybody who's been through that, it's a really hard class, and it's not at all intuitive the way that other 1L classes like crim or something may be intuitive because you've at least seen Law and Order or whatever. So for something like civil procedure, we just kind of throw you in the deep end and it's really hard. And the Socratic method is new for most people and they're scared. So this tool will let you upload your assigned reading, and then it will let you select the level that you want to be asked about it, hard, medium, easy kind of questions. And then it will ask you questions and it will give you feedback on your answers. It's important to me that they're accurate, though, to be honest with you, that's a little bit caveat emptor. The students would have to be like, hey, I don't think that's right, and they could look it up. And Luke and I have talked about this, and they haven't had complaints about hallucinations, and that's great. But I worry less about that for students using it to practice cold calls, because realizing that they got incorrect information would be just as valuable as getting correct information, as long as the students are critically using the tool. And so I've actually played around with it. Luke was kind enough to give me access to it. I put in a case I know very, very well, and I asked it to ask me expert level questions. I was impressed not only by some of the things it asked me, but also that it stumped me on one of them. Impressed and a little irritated, right? But what I thought was really interesting is, in my mind, the product is not legal knowledge. The product is confidence in your legal preparation. And that is something, again, for students that I can absolutely see why so many law schools are really investing in this for their students, because I constantly have students who say to me things like, I'm really scared of cold calling. Can you tell me in advance if I read this case right? I mean, it's like, no, there are 60 of you. I cannot tell you in advance if you read the case right. But this kind of tool, I think, gives students a little more confidence. And I assume the same is true for attorneys who are preparing for moots. As we all know, those of us who are litigators, if you have an oral argument, you need lots of moots, both for the process of refining your ideas, but also upping your confidence. And so to have low friction ways to have those, I just think is a really brilliant insight, and probably better than trying to predict judges, because every judge is super special and has no patterns and is absolutely sure that I know we have judges now in the room, so I'll be smart. But every judge maybe doesn't like to think that they have a pattern or that there are things that can be predicted in any event. So I think it was just a very wise pivot.
Thank you. I just want to make two real quick notes. One is, one of the cool things about the cold call aspect in particular is that it can be assigned by professors. So a student can use it independently. They can put in the cases they read. Cicero will question them Socratic method style. Or a professor can put the cases in, generate the questions, and then review the questions and the assessment criteria to decide, is this appropriate or not? So it can be done that way. The other thing I was going to say was just more of a general point about use of AI tools. So the common concern for faculty, rightly so, is student goes and uses AI, they prompt AI, AI gives them an answer like a vending machine. They press some buttons, they get what they want, they go on their way. Cicero would really be the opposite. Cicero is going to prompt you. It's going to get your answers that you generate, and then it's going to assess the quality of your answers. So it really flips it on its head, and I think that's what schools have found useful about it.
I have a question, Professor Cyphert, from your beloved former student, Zachary Spurrier.
Oh, hi, Zach.
He wants to know what your top 3 go-to educational resources would be if someone wanted to get up to speed on this stuff. And then Joshua, if you wouldn't care to kind of give your input too, I think that would be good.
Yeah. Kayla, do you think Zach is interested in lawyers getting up to speed, or just like, okay.
I
yeah.
would say so.
Well, I mean, I will absolutely, although he already had to leave for his flight, but I will plug Kevin Frazier's Scaling Laws podcast, which is just excellent. I listened to it. He was speaking with Professor LaFosse this morning, and I listen to it every time there's a new article episode. It is about AI and law, and he does a great job on bringing on the right guests and focusing on things that are really interesting. And I think that is a great approach. I am not in love with any AI and law casebooks, in part because they're just out of date as soon as they're in print. So I think you really have to, if you're taking an AI and law course, you have to constantly keep your work up to date. But I also think that there are some pretty good resources out there of people you could read if you wanted to try to keep things going. There are good newsletters. I'm trying to think of what some of the really good ones. There's Understanding AI, which is a Substack that I think is really good and is quite helpful. And then I've been impressed by some of the, if you're just trying to keep up to date on what courts are doing, because it is a full-time job to try to keep up to date with what courts are doing on AI. And so there are some pretty good compilation services that you can read as well that are produced by, like I know Law 360 has one you can sign up for that will deliver 12 stories or so to your inbox every single day that are breaking news on legal tech and legal AI things. So that would be for a lawyer who already has a pretty good background in law and is just trying to keep up to date on different types of AI resources. But if you are not necessarily a lawyer and you're just interested in AI, the Hard Fork podcast, which is produced by the New York Times, is excellent. It's Kevin Roos and Casey Newton, and they do a really good job of making complicated material funny and accessible, and I really like that podcast as well.
Yeah, so I'll tackle the question more from that second angle of if you're someone who's interested in AI and how it works. What I tell everybody, and this is about any technology, back to my days of teaching Python to middle schoolers, if you want to learn a technology, get your hands on it. That's the most important first step, because I think everything seems intimidating until it's not. And so just go open up ChatGPT and start asking it questions. That's the number one thing I can tell you to start getting familiar with it. But look at it through a critical lens. Some other really great resources. This one's kind of funny, but code.org, it's a platform developed for kids, for K-12 education. They have a phenomenal video series about how AI works from start to finish, starting at the big bubble of AI, getting all the way down to Gen AI, crossing through machine learning. And it's from like C-suite executives from Microsoft and OpenAI and all of these companies. Even though the video series is designed for kids, like the graphics, the animations are all fantastic. You can watch that video series and have an idea of what's going on. So I recommend it for adults as well. And then I would say I keep up to a lot, things move so fast in this industry right now. You need real-time information if you want to genuinely keep up. So podcasts are great at that. The way I keep up is through like LinkedIn and X and platforms like that. Find some people that are, especially if you follow the C-suites of these companies or the companies themselves, they're going to post about the newest releases and that sort of thing. But then follow like super users as well, and you'll get a lot of information that way.
Thank you. I guess we have time for about one more question, I think. If no one has one, I'll ask one to Professor Cyphert. I think it was Professor Ashley that mentioned much of the AI talent is going to big tech. What can we do differently to pivot and keep that in academia and research and really put ideas out into the world instead of standing behind NDAs?
It is such a great question, and I appreciate that Professor Ashley made that point. In my article on the challenges of regulating artificial intelligence, I note that this creates problems not just for academia, but problems for government. Because like 99% of, according to one Stanford study, something like 99% of PhDs in computer science are going into the private sector, not government, where they might be affecting policy, or not academia. So I don't think the full answer is just the pay disparity. Is the pay disparity huge? Absolutely. But the pay disparity is also huge between big law firms and government work. And we have lots of lawyers who go on and do government work. So what were we doing right in law to create a pipeline that is not happening in computer science? And I think one of it is that there is a pipeline of prestige. If you are a young lawyer and you have recently graduated and you want to do prestigious work and you're willing to forego a fair amount of salary, there are incredible government jobs that you can sign up for, whether it's something like the DOJ Honors Program or federal clerkships or state clerkships or whatever, right? That is an existing established pathway that your faculty will tell you about, that people will say, this is important. There's a great way to go from those positions into jobs in either academia or industry. You can go to a private firm or not. There are some of those, to be clear, there are some of those types of fellowship programs for folks with the rare and essential PhD in computer science skills, but I don't think there are enough of them. And some of the ones that currently exist are more like they're funded by private tech companies, and it's almost like, we're loaning you our people, and that's different, right? That's different. So I think it is so important if you are if you are a young person and you are a patriot, go serve your country, right? Like that would be a really important thing to consider doing, to work in government or academia and think about that. So I'm sure that the pay disparity does not help, but I really do think if we had more existing pipelines and maybe we could learn from law for those, that would be really good, because it's absolutely a problem.
I would like to weigh in on this one. This is a lot of what I do. Oh, yeah. So this is a lot of what I do. I see it every day, because I'm teaching an AI program. And quite frankly, I would think it was a failure personally if I placed a student in academia. But that's not a popular opinion. I want my students to go get six-figure jobs and be donors. But the way we've solved this problem, it is a problem, right? Because the people who have the most up-to-date knowledge are in industry, in high-tech fields. The way we've solved the problem, I think, is pretty easy. You partner with industry. I think it's really just that simple. So industry needs these talent pipelines. They need our students, right? In exchange for getting our students, you have to help us develop curriculum. You have to come adjunct classes for us. You have to sponsor experiential learning projects, right? You have to design case studies for us. And we have a number of partnerships where we're driving innovative curriculum using the boots on the ground who have this advanced technology that are making six figures and are still being able to contribute back to academia. So that's a model I really champion, is working alongside industry and getting alumni to give back.
I'm going to push back on that just for a minute, because I don't disagree with you that that's a model that works really well. And you have to have permanent people in academia who are not sort of feeling that they're beholden to industry. And to give as an example, I mean, some of my scholarship, and maybe I should be careful as a pre-tenure person, but I've made the decision I'm going to do what I think is right. Some of my scholarship is highly critical of large technology companies, and and sometimes that ruffles feathers. If I felt like I had to kind of depend on them to fund my students, I don't know that I would feel as free to say what I think is right in my scholarship and to follow my research where I think it logically concludes. So I'm not disagreeing with you fully, Josh. I know that I'm not totally unaware of how funding works and that it's important to have funding, but I think it is also really important that we continue to have that kind of academic freedom within academia too, where people feel that they can hold to account powerful companies, because if we lose that, then I think we are in a pretty bad place.
I'll push back on your pushback just a little bit. So, I mean, one of the things in developing these deep relationships with these corporate partners is when they have an ethical issue or an implementation issue or a question about how to develop a talent pipeline, they pick up the phone and they call me, right? And so I have a level of influence there at that level where the decisions actually make, like with the C-suites, that I wouldn't if we didn't develop these strong partnerships. So to your point, yes, like we need all types of folks, but I think there's a level of decision making, like influence and decision making, that you can develop through these partnerships that might mean giving up a little bit of academic freedom, but I think you can still have that impact and that change.
All right, we have one more quick question, I think.
Well, not so much. I mean, I guess what I would like is for some discussion maybe between both Professor Meadows and Professor Cyphert that's a little bit more of that tension between what you said and what you've just said, because I get the idea that if you have partnerships with business, you can shape the thinking inside corporate America and even beyond academic freedom in the university. Part of what the issue, I think, is we don't have good public policy on technology generally, but certainly not for AI. So if the influence is inside corporate America, where is the balance that creates the dialogue between what is the public good versus the solely private good? I mean, I'm a capitalist. I don't have a problem with people making a lot of money from their businesses, but if you are shaping public policy of what's right for America, how do you achieve the balance between the advocacy for public good versus solely private good?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab. I mean, I think I think it's fantastic that you have us giving the answers we're giving, right? I'm located at the business school, you're located at the law school. If we were not giving the answers we're giving, we would have a problem, right? Because it takes all types, right? So you need people that want to take the approach of let's embed ourselves in companies and shape that way, and you need people that want to embed themselves in public policy and shape that way. So I think that's really the beauty of academia, is that we solve problems from all different angles and we do it together. So we can sit up here and we can have this discussion, and we can go shake hands afterwards. A lot of places you can't do that. So I think that's really what academia brings to the table there.
Yeah, and I think it's part of what's so great about the land grant mission, right? Josh's work is so important, and he's excellent at it. And it's guided by the land grant mission. It's guided by helping make sure that we're, serving the people of all 55 counties of the great state of West Virginia and doing things that are in our collective best interest. And that's why academia's involvement in this is crucial. And I'm so glad that he is someone these companies will call, because sometimes you look at some of the decisions that some technology companies make and you think they're not calling anyone for some of this advice, or they're calling the wrong people. And I think that I think that the right balance is one we can only achieve through public participation in the democratic process. And it's why I'm so passionate about educating people about AI, so that you then call your representative and you say, hey, this is important to me. This is how I feel about it. Again, in my regulating AI class, I don't know the answer, but I know that part of the answer is teaching my students the basics, because my students are inevitably going to be public policy leaders. I mean, look at our state legislature and look at how many of them have law degrees, right? So I know that I'm helping shape the next generation of West Virginia leaders to be thoughtful about these issues. Not that they'll agree with me, plenty of them disagree with me. That's great. That's what academic freedom is all about too. But that they'll be grounded in evidence, and that they will have been thoughtful about pros and cons, and that they'll be ready and able to weigh those things. So I don't think we have the right mix yet, but it absolutely will be a mix. There's no world in which we could set regulation without consulting industry. That's where the expertise largely is. Now, avoiding regulatory capture by giving too large a seat at the table to industry is important, but that's a nuanced question. That's a question of degree and kind. And to be clear, Josh and I absolutely, I think, agree more than we disagree on all those topics.
All right, let's give it up for our Mountain State panel here.